Hi, everyone. We'll be starting in 2 minutes. Thank you. Make that 1 minute. All right, it's 9 a.m. Ayan na. Good morning to everyone. Welcome to today's event, a 3-day event actually, the COVID-19 Monitoring Toolkit Unlocking Faster. My name is 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗃. I will be your MC for this 3-day event. I would just like to kindly remind everyone that at the end of each session, a link will be shared to an evaluation form. And it's important, you will receive your certificate after submission of these evaluation forms. We will now have the national anthem to be followed by the invocation. Let us all listen intently to the anthem and the prayer that will subsequently happen afterwards. Paulo G, the videos, please. Good morning, everyone.
Bayang magiliw, kailan sa sinanganan, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupit, di ka pasisiin. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bakaw, may nilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagdiningning, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng 𝗦𝗽𝗁𝗏 pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang binigaya na pag may mga apil, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo. That does not fade or wither. In Him alone is our hope. In Him alone is our strength. In Him alone are we justified. In Him alone are we saved. When will you cease running in search of hollow meaning? Let His love feed the hunger in your soul till it overflows with joy. You yearn to know. In Him alone is our hope. In Him alone is our strength. In Him alone are we justified. We sing with His love and His mercy. In Him alone is our hope. In Him alone is our strength. In Him alone are we justified. You save me with His love and His mercy.
Good morning again, everyone. Welcome once again to the COVID-19 Monitoring Toolkit, Unlocking Faster, the science behind the FASTER platform. Today is the first of 3 days where we will listen to the science and math behind the analytical tools that have been developed by the FASTER team since the disease surveillance platform was revived last March 2020. Today is also a special day as the School of Science and Engineering hosts the first of many shares, SHARES, meaning Science Hub for academics, researchers, and students. To our speakers for today, we thank you. To our dear guests, thank you for joining us in this very special occasion. Just some house rules po. To our dear participants, please make sure that you submit the evaluation form at the end of each day, as you will receive your certificate after the submission of these forms. Also, let's place all our mics, our microphones in mute, and switch off your video camera during all the presentations to preserve bandwidth, etc. For registered guests, you may use the chat box for your inquiries. Now, since each day is filled with many unlocks, let us now proceed with the welcome remarks of this morning to be given by none other than the Dean of the School of Science and Engineering, Dr. Evangeline Bautista.
Good morning. Welcome to COVID-19 Monitoring Toolkit, Unlocking Faster, the science behind the FASTER platform. I would especially like to welcome you, Sec. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, the Undersecretary for Research and Development of the Department of Science and Technology, Ms. 𝗦𝗫𝗀𝗏, Chief Research Information, Communication, and Utilization Division of PCHRD, as well as other officials of DOST, DOH, MDRRM, and a wide expanse of representatives from different LGUs throughout the nation. Welcome as well to the FASTER team, academics, scientists, and students joining us this morning. This webinar is actually the first one being hosted through 𝗁𝗏 Shares, a platform that we from the School of Science and Engineering of Ateneo, or 𝗁𝗏 for short, are using to reach out and share knowledge, information, and anything else which may prove useful to all. We are actually launching 𝗪𝗀 shares through Unlocking Faster, and we hope that this will be followed by several more events as relevant as this one we're having now. By end of September, we will have a second webinar called 𝗪𝗀𝗀 on another project supported by DOST. So in this difficult time, there's still much to be grateful for, one of which is the stable presence and support of the Department of Science and Technology and its agencies. So once again, welcome to Unlocking Faster, and I hope that the next 3 days turn into a profitable and engaging exchange of ideas. Good day.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bautista, for that wonderful welcome remark. And now, to officially open the session, let us listen to the message of 𝗪𝗀 𝗀𝗃, the Undersecretary of the Department of Science and Technology. Good morning, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Dean Evangeline Bautista of the School of Science and Engineering of Ateneo de Manila University, Dr. Rina, Dr. Elvi, Dr. Raymond, Dr. Marlene, Ken, the rest of the FASTER team, and those who are participating in today's Unlocking Faster, the COVID-19 Monitoring Toolkit. First of all, I would like to thank former President Father Jet and President Father Yap and Dean Banjo for allowing and supporting the FASTER team from Ateneo de Manila University to operationalize FASTER for the use of the government. I've met our researchers in the last 6 years, but it is in the last 6 months that I got to know them for their professionalism, relentless pursuit of excellence, and love of country. There were nights in the last 6 months that the FASTER team members had to spend working to deliver the data and information needed by decision makers. I also observed that our researchers are very good teachers as they assisted our regional partners from the DOST regional offices, the local government units, and now even members of the IATF in making informed decisions. As a result, we now have FASTER, the feasibility analysis of syndromic surveillance using spatiotemporal epidemiological modeler for early detection of diseases that is used by various government agencies to make science-based decisions, from ECQ to MGCQ to local lockdowns, and even monitoring the health system capacity. The motto is faster than COVID. The FASTER platform has provided us with wonderful simulations and projections so that we can make intelligent decisions that will project the best outcomes for the country in this fight against COVID-19. I remember the first time I used FASTER. I did not experience any difficulty in navigating through the FASTER and getting the information that I needed. FASTER is truly compliant with POLA, or the principle of least astonishment. The program worked as I expected, and to this day, I still use it when needed. Based on the data, I can determine whether or not this action or that action should be taken, and maybe we can suggest it to the IATF, and maybe the LGU can be informed that maybe this is the action that can be considered by the LGU. Bottom line, we can give advice that is backed up by data. The most important part about FASTER is that it was quickly finished by the Ateneo de Manila team, together with their partners in UP Manila National Telehealth Center and the other collaborators, especially the Epidemiology Bureau of the Department of Health, and of course, the Department of Science and Technology, Philippine Council for Health Research and Development. Many times when we defend our budget at the DBM, in the Senate, and in Congress, they always want to know what we have produced already. And sometimes it's difficult to answer that it takes some time to develop something. Well, FASTER was conceived in 2016 for dengue, measles, and typhoid fever. But the FASTER team repurposed it and applied it to COVID-19 in less than 2 months. So this is not really just the FASTER team, but also the fastest team. I would like to thank all the speakers today until Wednesday for opening FASTER for everyone to see by unlocking FASTER. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you, 𝗪𝗁𝗂, for officially opening the event and for your very encouraging words to the FASTER team and to everyone. And with that, we now formally open day 1 of the event, Unlocking FASTER, by listening to the project leader, Dr. Rina Estuar, as she gives a brief overview about the project and the journey of the team. Good morning, ma'am.
Meet FASTER 2016. This was the time that we developed FASTER for disease surveillance on dengue, measles, and typhoid. From this experience, we realized several things when we developed a disease surveillance platform. One is that the platform should allow for different sources of information. The platform should allow for operationalizing different types of models, and the platform should allow for reporting from the ground. This is FASTER today. FASTER than COVID-19 started with simple tools such as providing case demographics, and then we went on to providing scenario-based projections, which had a counterpart for hospital capacity requirements, testing requirements, and community requirements. And then we moved on to providing our decision makers with an automatic way of determining the classification of our LGUs through case doubling time and critical care utilization rate. We provided visualization to know whether we are in the danger zone already in our health capacity requirements. We provided a list that can be downloaded and visualized on a map. We also produced charts on time-varying reproduction number using various methods. And we also included non-health risk assessment indicators such as security, social, and economic risk assessment. And we localized the analysis by providing clustering analysis, hotspot analysis, and attack rate. And lastly, we incorporated our local reporting tools into the contra COVID platform of the Department of Health to improve contact tracing. We have come a long way since we began in March, the lockdown providing us with an opportunity to all work together. And here we are 5 months later. As proposed, we have developed tools grounded on the needs of our stakeholders, the Department of Health, our government agencies, and our LGUs. FASTER than COVID-19 platform is a product of all the hard work, essentially translated into unrecoverable sleepless nights, expressed and sometimes heated arguments, constant cognitive dissonance, but I consider all of these experiences as graces, for we have experienced a deep understanding in perspectives and beliefs that to serve means not to count the cost, yet to serve the public means there is a cost. Despite all the differences, we continue to share what we can and continue to promote unity towards a common goal. To my team, thank you for the steadfast commitment to serve our country by sharing your talents and much of your time for the greater good. Our work is far from over, and we still have a long way to go. I sincerely believe that there is a light at the end of this very, very long tunnel. Continue to seek. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Estuar, for that overview of not just FASTER, but the actual journey of the FASTER team. I'm sure everyone here would like to know more about FASTER. That's why we're here. Thank you, ma'am. Let us now call on Dr. 𝗪𝗲𝗀 𝗘𝗽𝗶𝗀 Professor of the Mathematics Department and Head of the Mathematical Modeling Team of FASTER, to moderate the first session of the morning. Good morning, Ma'am LV.
Good morning. Thank you, Andre. First, I'd like to remind the participants that you may key in your questions during the presentation. We will try our best to answer your questions after the presentation or even before the end, if possible. Now, our first presenter is Dr. J. Michael R. Macalalag, Assistant Professor and Graduate Program Coordinator of the Mathematics Department at Caraga State University, Ampayan, Butuan City. He has been teaching mathematics courses in the said university for 9 years. He graduated with BS Mathematics, magna cum laude, and MS Mathematics at Caraga State University in 2010 and 2013 respectively. In July 2019, he finished the degree PhD in Mathematics at Ateneo de Manila University through the aid of 𝗏 K-12 Transition Program Scholarship. His dissertation was in the field of disease modeling, of which he has introduced and studied epidemic models for tuberculosis, dengue, and HIV/AIDS using delayed differential equations. His research interests also include topology and integration theory. Let us listen to Jay as he discusses the conceptualization of the FASTER model. Jay?
Hello, Doc LB. Uh, Hello. Doc, can you hear me clearly? Hello.
Yes, yes, Jay.
Okay. Um, yeah, that's it. Okay, once again, sorry. Let me share my screen. Welcome to this first presentation of the session 1 of this webinar series. And in this talk, I will be presenting on briefly discussing to you the mathematical model that is used by FASTER. So along the discussion, I aim to give answers to the following question. First, how can we mathematically model diseases like COVID-19? What are some challenges we encounter in the Philippine setting? How does the model used by FASTER platform work? And what are some limitations and future steps to improve the FASTER model? So now let's talk about how do we actually model diseases. Now, one can actually see when looking at diseases, they are somehow complex systems. Now, this is due to several reasons, like the fact that the spread of the disease or pathogen depends mainly on by its nature. And by its nature, it has several factors to be considered. Say, for example, the mode of transmission of the disease. You have this type of infectiousness, you have the length of infectiousness, and the likes. So in this with these variables, they would actually interact in multiple ways, which may vary over time. So with these complex things going on, we want to somehow get a picture of possible scenarios that will happen in the future, which is mainly caused by these diseases. By doing so, we capture a portion from the reality of these disease dynamics by considering assumptions and describe the simplified system through the aid of compartmental models and differential equations. So with the working model, we could somehow describe the disease spread, and then we could explain why the disease spreads more in some areas that are other than compared to the other areas. Say, for example, we can look at the level of physical distancing that the individuals are practicing, as well as the level of testing. So as I've mentioned, we could somehow give projections or prediction on how will the disease spread in the future using this model. And most importantly, models could give insights that may be basis by our health authorities in designing interventions to control the spread of the disease. So what are these challenges that we have actually encountered when modeling COVID-19? Now, as we all know, COVID-19 can be experienced in different ways. If you will be infected, you may, it's possible that you do not show symptoms. And this is the case wherein we have this asymptomatic. And we also have this, this is common, very common, that it's when you are infected, you don't show symptoms. Now, the problem with this is that with this asymptomatic, we could not know that, or that person doesn't know that he's already infecting others by just roaming around, and he just thought that he's still healthy because there's no symptoms being shown. And then another thing is that whether we like it or not, there's this uncertainty in actual case numbers. Recorded cases by DOH are not necessarily all the cases which spread the infection. So there would really be some undetected cases that we need to account for modeling. So much for that. Let me present to you the model that is used by FASTER. So we are considering a compartmental model. This is an SEIR type model in which the infectious compartment is subdivided into two more compartments, the asymptomatic and symptomatic, and we have added this confirmed compartment. So with this one, if you look at susceptible, these are the individuals who are in the community that can be infected by the virus. And then E, that's for the exposed. These are the individuals who are now infected but are not yet capable of transmitting the virus to the community. And then after some time, later sometime, you have this latency period. IA would be the individuals who are now infectious but not manifesting symptoms. And then IS would be those infectious individuals with symptoms. And then later sometime, they will be confirmed. And that would be the individuals who are now really confirmed to the disease. And then we have this R, and that's for the recovered individuals. Now, if we look at the susceptible compartment, there's A in there, and that would represent for the recruitment rate by birth, and that's constant. And then when these susceptible individuals would interact with asymptomatic infectious and symptomatic infectious, they will be exposed again with the virus. So you have this transition rate from that going to E. And then later sometime called the latency period, that's the period from the exposure of the pathogen up to the time of infectiousness, and that's denoted by tau in there. A portion C of those exposed individuals would proceed to being asymptomatic, and then a portion 1 minus C would proceed to symptomatic compartment. And then some of those asymptomatic individuals will develop symptoms at the rate of omega, going there to IS. And then some would be confirmed, delta A, at the rate of delta A, going to the confirmed compartment. Also, with these symptomatic infectious, they will be confirmed at the rate delta S, going to the confirmed compartment again. And then some asymptomatic infectious will recover without undergoing treatment, so they will now proceed to the recovered compartment. Now for the compartment C, they will actually recover. So some of, not all of course, but when they recover at the rate R, they will now go to compartment R. And then some would die at the rate epsilon T due to the disease. There are also people dying because of the disease in the IS compartment, and that's denoted by epsilon sub I. Okay, now those mu in there, those would represent for the natural death rate of those individuals in each compartment. So you have those going out, arrows going out from each compartment. Okay, now if we look at this one, for the beta, that's actually, it's the transmission rate in which we have the team incorporated the effect of community quarantine and the minimum health standards that the people are taking. So it's in this parameter beta in which the effect of those parameters are included. And then we have here delta S. This is the, in this parameter, we included the effect of testing, and we term it as the health system capacity. That includes the testing and the how we isolate and treat the infectious individuals. So this is obtained by taking the number of days from symptom onset date to isolation. So that's our delta S. So for example, if you have this number of days from date of symptom onset to date of isolation is 5, so our delta S would be 20%. So basically, this is our model that we're working on. And one major assumption with this is that for the compartment C, once they are confirmed, they will be isolated. So making that they will not anymore contribute to the transmission of the disease in the community. So that's one major assumption for that when they are confirmed already. Okay, so this would be out from that model. Here's the model equations that we are dealing with. So there would be 6 differential equations of that. Okay, now these are the things that I mentioned a while ago. We have these different compartments, and then susceptible, exposed, the IA, IS, confirmed, and recovered. And of course, these are the transition parameters that we have. S to E, that's the transition rate. E to IA, you have, as I mentioned, you have the latency period. And E to IS, again, the same latency period, but there will be proportion of individuals who are going to IA and IS. And then IA to C, that's the detection rate for the asymptomatic. IS to C, again, that's the delta S, that's the symptomatic detection rate, and you have the recovery rate. Now, with that model we had, we also considered this very important quantity. This is the basic reproduction number. Well, when we talk about basic reproduction number, it will just tell us the number of secondary cases that a single infected individual would produce in its period of infectiousness when put in a totally susceptible population. So for example, if I'm infected, and then if our basic reproductive number is 2, so during my period of infectiousness, I will be able to infect 2 people during my entire period of infectiousness. So this is very important, simply because we can just look at the basic reproductive number to tell or to see if this disease is spreading in the community at a faster rate or a slower rate. So with this one, we considering our model, we actually use the NGM, next generation matrix approach to obtain this quantity, and we have this one, RNAT, to be that value, and that is actually dependent on the model parameters that we are dealing with. Now, the idea here is that we need to make, along the way, we need to make this value of RNAT to be less than 1, so that we could somehow say that we are trying to contain or not contain, even slow the spread of the disease in the community. And by doing so, by trying to make this value RNAT less than 1, we should consider some interventions to make so that this spread will not be that, well, it can be slowed anyway. Okay, so how does the model help the FASTER team? So in this case, we have this description and explanation, meaning to say that these regional values of parameters can serve as mathematical diagnosis of different areas. For example, if looking at the basic reproductive number, we can somehow say that higher values of those would lead to faster local spread. And then this model also gives insights. Given parameter values for a certain area, well, of course, we can look at the future scenarios of that. And by going forward in time, we could look at the trends and how infectious and confirmed cases will go up and down. And again, this will help identify which areas are more likely in need of more serious attention. And this is the most important thing. It would give us some intervention ideas by looking at or by altering or introducing parameters that would change the behavior of the system. For example, these simulated changes can help inform the best way to respond to the pandemic. Say, for example, if we look at the testing, we can somehow ask how much should testing increase to somehow eliminate the spread of the disease or help eliminate the spread of the disease. And then by looking at this one, we could have this scenario if we could double the testing rate to achieve this RNAT below 1, so we can simulate that in the platform. And then we could also look at the quarantine levels. By how much should transmission be reduced to significantly slow down the COVID-19 transmission? And we can do this by changing this level across the community quarantine that has been imposed by the government. Okay, now let me just show you some. Let me tell you these limitations of the model that we are having now. Actually, in this model, we are considering homogeneous mixing. Meaning to say that individual from the north would actually infect individuals from the south. And that's a major assumption that we are taking in with this model. And we tried to somehow compensate this limitation by trying to consider the population density and localizing the simulations of the model. And then we also considered equivalent infectiousness of asymptomatic and symptomatic. So meaning to say they have the same level of infecting others for those having symptoms and without symptoms. And then we were not able to account for the repatriates and LSIs. So for now, we are now trying to, we are formulating a model that would account for these repatriates and LSIs. And then in this model that we are having, reinfection is not accounted for. I mean to say that once the infectious individual has recovered from the disease, then it is assumed that he will not be contacted again by the disease. So these are just some limitations of the model that we have. Okay, so let me just have, yeah. Okay, let me have my conclusion for this. FASTER model is an SEIR type wherein the effect of community quarantine and testing are incorporated. And the model does not capture every aspect of the disease transmission. So we better be careful in doing interpretation for the different projections and numbers that we get from the model. And the model is not a crystal ball, but it is a useful tool to give insights to the course of pandemic in the Philippines. So it's somehow I want to share this one that it's far better to consider the insights that we get from the model rather than the actual numbers that it produces. And I think that's all for the presentation. And thank you very much for attending this present. Dr. Alvin.
Thank you, Jay. Okay. All the way from Carnegie Mellon University in Pennsylvania, USA, our next presenter is Mr. Uyheng, Mr. Joshua Uyheng, or Josh. Josh is a doctoral student in societal computing at Carnegie Mellon University, where he studies online disinformation, political polarization, and hate speech from a computational social science perspective. He obtained undergraduate degrees in mathematics and psychology, summa cum laude, at the Ateneo de Manila University. His research has been recognized at the BPIDOST Science Awards and the Psychological Association of the Philippines Junior Affiliates. Recent selections from his work are featured or forthcoming in outlets such as Political Psychology, European Journal of Social Psychology, and Computational and Mathematical Organization Theory. With the FASTER team, his work focuses on optimization and evaluation frameworks for localized models of COVID-19 in the Philippines. Let us listen to Josh as he explains how we localize the FASTER model. Go, Josh.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second session of the day. So my talk is about localizing the FASTER model, and this builds off of the presentation from Jay earlier. And basically, what we want to know is, given the theoretical model that was designed by the FASTER team, how can we bridge the gap from theory to application so that the FASTER model is able to generate useful insights for policymakers. So the outline of today's talk, first we will discuss on a broad level what it means to localize a mathematical model. So this will be in relatively general terms that's applicable to COVID-19, but also other models of disease. We will ask, how do we localize our model to the Philippine setting? And how can we use the localized model to respond to the pandemic? So first, just building off of Jay's presentation, right? We're looking at the FASTER model and we want to know what it means to localize it. So localization is all about parameters, and parameters are the values which govern the flow of the population from one compartment to the next. So just to review, right, what the model is doing to model COVID-19 in the Philippines is it breaks down the population into these categories. So you're a susceptible person, or you've been exposed, or you're infectious, etc., etc. And how the model looks at the way that you transition from one category to the next is in terms of these other values. So these arrows between the categories. So on those arrows, you will see these variables, and those variables are numbers which determine how quickly or how slowly you will transfer from one box to another. So for example, if you look at the transition from E to I, that captures the rate at which people are getting exposed, are moving from being exposed to COVID to actually becoming infectious. So that's what a parameter is. So using those parameters, what we're interested in is this process called localization. So if you look at the diagram from earlier, it's just a bunch of Greek letters, right? But to become useful to the local setting, we need to turn those letters into numbers. And what those numbers are have to reflect the reality in the Philippines. So what localization is doing, it wants to balance universality and specificity. So many models of COVID-19, so obviously there are many models of the disease which aren't just in the Philippines, right? So many of them are going to capture similar processes. And overall, the flow will look the same regardless of context. So there are some universal properties of the disease which we want to capture. So for example, many global studies show that when you're infected with COVID, you can be asymptomatic and you can also be symptomatic. So we want to capture that dynamic also in the Philippine model. But given those universal properties, there are also specific properties of the disease that are local to the Philippines. So for example, we have to recognize that because we are an archipelago, the outbreaks are going to behave in a different way versus if we were just one big landmass. There are also, of course, different social and economic factors which will shape the way the disease spreads. So, we're not going to have exactly the same social and economic situation as other countries that are also facing COVID. And finally, as time passes, the government on multiple levels is also implementing different control measures, and that will also impact the dynamics of the disease. So taken together, right, given that there are universal properties, but there are also local specificities, we have to be able to make sure that the model can balance those two things. And that's what localization is all about. When we turn those letters into numbers, how can we balance universality and specificity? So the way that we actually do localization, there are actually 3 steps. So the first step is literature review. So this really just goes back to basics in conducting scientific research. So when we talk about COVID-19 having universal properties or general properties across multiple contexts, these are the properties that we can refer to existing literature on. So because these are properties that we know that other scientists can also study in other contexts, we can also draw from the insights that they've already derived from their research. So for example, COVID-19, it's a pathogen. It will have some natural transmission rate that will be similar across multiple contexts. So in this case, we're looking at this beta symbol with a 0. So we call that beta naught. So this is a universal number corresponding to the natural infectivity of COVID-19. And we can get estimates for that number based on existing studies. But then again, because there is a natural number, it's going to go through also the local context of the Philippines, and that will change the infectiousness of COVID-19. So from beta 0 or beta naught, we're actually dealing with beta without the 0. So that's just beta on its own. So this is the effective transmission rate. And the way that we translate from beta naught to beta, that's using this other Greek letter. So that's lambda. So there is something that we can get from the literature, this beta naught value, and this is the natural infectiousness of COVID-19. And what we actually deal with in the Philippines is beta. So the way that you transition from one to another is through this other variable, lambda. So this is the thing that we can get from literature review. I'll talk about these other variables in subsequent slides. Other things that we can look at in the literature are these alpha values. So when a person gets exposed with COVID, right, we know that they can either become symptomatic or asymptomatic. And this fraction of people exposed to COVID that will become one category or another, these are fractions that we can also study in the literature. So we can look at past studies in other places, and based on how many people become symptomatic or asymptomatic, this can help inform the way we also look at that fraction in our context. And then other things that we can get from existing literature, or in our case, we can get from existing statistics already, like from PSA. So we can also use natural birth and mortality rates from the PSA. Okay. So the second strategy that we have for localization, besides just looking in the literature, we can also directly calculate some values from the data. So we're no longer dealing in this case with universal properties of the disease. Instead, it's something that's already specific to the Philippines. But at the same time, these are things we can observe from the data. So for example, one of the important values that Jay described earlier was the health system capacity / detection rate. So this is the rate at which you will transfer from infectious to confirmed, right? So because we know that people are getting confirmed, and that's actually part of our data, we can use the average time that it takes for someone to have onset of symptoms to actually becoming admitted as our way of estimating this transition rate. We also have a recovery rate. So when you get the transition from confirmed to recovered, this is also something that we can get from data, right? So if we know how long it takes for someone to recover after they've been confirmed, we can get the average of that. Okay. And then finally, we also have COVID-19 mortality rate. So there are some studies which have a more general number, but in our case, what we're interested in is the rate at which people, the rate of mortality in the Philippines. So we can also compute this. So there are also there's also data of mortalities based on confirmed cases. So this is also something we can compute just by looking at the data and performing this computation here. Okay, and then the final way that we perform localization is computational optimization. So this is the third and final step that we do, and this is only done when parameters cannot be extrapolated from literature. So they're not universal properties of the disease. They also cannot be observed directly in the data. So this corresponds to step 1, the literature values. Step 2 is the direct calculation from data. So if you cannot do both things, then that's when we rely on computational optimization. So that's when we perform another technique in order to get those values. So the question in computational optimization is, what are the values of the unknown parameters that will allow us to match the data that we actually have? So we tried different algorithms. There are lots of different optimization frameworks. And for those who are interested, the specific one we're currently using is LBFGSB. But just without getting into the technical details of this algorithm, basically what is happening is, let's consider, this is a simulated data set. Let's consider these circles, and let's say those are actual data points. So let's look at the 3 colored lines. Those are 3 different possible outputs of the model. What our optimization algorithm will do is look for the values of the parameters that will make this curve fit the data well. So it looks like if we go with the red curve, the values of the parameters are not doing very well because they're under predicting the data, meaning the model projections are always lower than the data. So that's not a good curve. If we use the green curve, that means we're over predicting the data. So the parameter values for this curve are also incorrect. What the optimization algorithm will do is look for the values that will produce this blue curve. So this blue curve, it's not going to be a perfect match to every single point, but it's going to produce the best fit that that is possible with the model. So that's the curve that we go with. Okay. So when you put all those three things together, we have a lot of parameters in this model, and we're localizing the model to the Philippines by using all three steps that I described just now. So we can get them through literature review, we can calculate them directly, and we can compute using our optimization algorithm. And once we have a localized model, that's when we get to put it on the FASTER dashboard. So once all the values are obtained from literature, calculated from data, and optimized computationally, we can then simulate the time series of active or cumulative cases, and then show it on the dashboard. And when we run our processes for the different regions, we generally achieve very high performance, usually above 0.9 in correlation. And when there are cases that the performance is not as good, this is an indication for us to revisit the model. So are there things that we have to recalculate? Are there other literature values we can consider? Is there something wrong with optimization algorithm, et cetera, et cetera? So this framework is not just a way for us to get the model to work, but it's also a way for us to know when the model is not working. And so it also allows us to refine our approach as the situation also evolves. And so just some final considerations once you have a localized model, right? So once your theoretical model is now bridged to the reality, you can do a number of very helpful things for policy making. So for example, you can get once your model already fits the data, you can project into the future so that even if the data hasn't actually happened yet, you can see what the model will say is going to happen in a future time. So this helps us figure out, okay, where is the disease going if all the conditions remain the same. You can also, as Jay mentioned, you can also use localized models to perform some kind of diagnosis. So if you have 3 different time series, which may correspond, for example, to 3 different regions, you can quantify using the model which regions seem to be experiencing faster growth or slower growth in COVID-19, etc. And finally, and this is probably one of the most interesting things that you can do, besides just projecting into the future, you can also start to adjust the parameters and see what would happen if you perform different kinds of interventions. So, for example, you already know the local value that governs the flow from infectious to confirmed. So that corresponds to the detection rate of COVID. So you can answer questions using a localized model, such as if we increase our rate of detection, how will the dynamics of the disease change, right? So you can also try different values of the parameter to see what's an optimal way to increase certain intervention efforts. Okay, so just some other considerations. Right. So the performance of our methods, it's going to rely on an objective function. So by objective function, in this case, we're talking about when you try to fit the model to the data, we want to know which data, right? So for example, if you fit to the active cases versus if you fit the cumulative cases, there may be differences in performance. As the data also comes in, and right, we know that data collection and data management efforts are continuously evolving also, that can also change the performance of the model. And so this is right. This is reason for researchers like ourselves to also be paying attention to other developments in the real world as we're developing our theoretical models. As a more technical consideration, as Jay mentioned, this is a complex phenomenon. So that means there may be multiple parameter values that achieve similar levels of fit to the data. So that's why we have to run the optimization algorithm multiple times and look at the distribution of best fitting values, and that helps us make better determinations for what are the correct values to use. And then finally, right, there's only so much also that optimization algorithms and literature values, etc., can achieve. The model does rely on several assumptions, and if the model does not incorporate certain features such as geospatial connectivity, demographic nuances, then those particular dynamics will also they're not the scope anymore of the optimization and calculation values calculation procedures I'm talking about here. So just as a recap, mathematical models require localization to adapt to concrete context. So again, we want to bridge the theory to the real world, and we do that through three different strategies: through literature review, through direct calculation, and computational optimization. And then once you have the localized model, you can use it for a lot of different purposes to understand and respond to COVID-19 in the Philippines. So that's my talk. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'll give it back to Dr. Elvie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josh. Okay, I will now proceed by introducing our last speaker for the first session, Carlo Estadilla. Carlo is an infectious disease modeler and has a master's degree in applied mathematics and a bachelor's degree in psychology from UP Diliman. Before working on COVID-19, he did research on optimal mitigation strategies for the HIV epidemic in the Philippines. He also has 5 years of data analytics experience in the industry and teaches college mathematics at the Ateneo de Manila University. Let us welcome Carlo, Mr. Carlo Estadilla, as he discusses simulating interventions with the FASTER model. Carlo?
Hello, good morning, everyone. So my colleagues has talked about the foundation of the FASTER model and how it was built. And then we have also discussed how the model was localized to adapt to the Philippine setting. So for this talk, for my portion, I will talk about how we simulate interventions with the FASTER model, which is one of the main purposes of the FASTER model when it comes to decision making or when it comes to policies that are formed to control the epidemic. Okay, so we know so far that we have two main interventions. So these are what we call non-pharmaceutical interventions. So the first one is community quarantines, and then the second one is testing, tracing, and isolating. So we need to find a way somehow to represent these two interventions mathematically and then incorporate them into our ODE model. So for community quarantine, it has been shown earlier that it is represented by the letter lambda. So theoretically, if lambda is equal to 1, that means no contact or transmission is occurring. So this represents the inhibition of transmission or the inhibition of contacts between people who are infected and then people who are susceptible. And then likewise, if lambda is equal to 0, number of contacts is as is. That means no intervention is happening. So people are mixing normally pre-pandemic levels, etc. And then we also have testing, tracing, and isolating. In our jargon, this is testing and health system capacity, or THSC for short. So this represents the rate of transfer from the infectious symptomatic compartment to the confirmed compartment. So our model has this sort of assumption that if you have been isolated, you are no longer infectious. And this is represented by the letter delta S. So if delta S is equal to 1, we assume that all undetected symptomatics will be detected and isolated within 1 day. And then if delta S is equal to 0, no symptomatics are being detected and isolated. Okay, so these are the two main interventions that we consider so far. In the model, they are represented here and here. So as you can see in the first factor, if lambda is equal to 1, this full transmission factor will be 0. And if it is 0, this third factor, 1 minus lambda, will just become 0, or will just become 1 rather. And then we have the normal rate of transmission, beta times IA plus IS over N. Likewise, delta S represents the rate of transfer from IS to C. If it is 1, that means all of the individuals in the IS compartment will go to C. And if it is 0, no rate of transfer is happening. Okay, so these are the sample simulations that we did in order to show that or to examine the effects of these two interventions. So the first question, or some the reoccurring questions that we ask is, what if we vary the CQ level? So what if we extend the community quarantine by 15 days? What if we extend it by 30 days? What if we return to pre-pandemic levels? What will happen? So these are the questions that can be answered by simulations in the model. So for example, as you can see, the blue line represents the the intervention. If lambda is as is, and then if we increase lambda for 15 days, the number of cumulative cases, the number of predicted cumulative cases will decrease up to 2 by a drastic level. And then if we increase lambda for 30 days, it will further decrease. So from this graph, or from the model, we know that increasing CQ is effective. So the higher the restriction in the number of infections, the higher the level of community quarantine, the lower the number of cumulative cases. Likewise, we also simulated through the model that if we vary delta S, we can also see a huge reduction in terms of the number of cumulative confirmed. So from 0.25, if we increase it to 0.4, there is a drastic reduction in the number of cumulative confirmed cases. Also, one thing that I would like to point out is that delta S, as you can see, is not linearly proportional to in terms of the reduction in the number of cases. So if we increase delta S from 0.25 to 0.4, there is a huge reduction. If we increase it to 0.4 to 0.5, there is somewhat a little a less reduction. And then if we further increase it to 0.75, the number of reduction is very little. So one thing that we can ask from these observations is that, given this behavior of delta S and how it affects the number of cumulative confirmed, is there sort of a sweet spot that we can just aim for, and without going too much further in terms of our intervention? So parang meron bang sweet spot in terms of the level of testing and health system capacity that we can strive for? And similarly, same question for CQ. So far, we confirm from our models that community quarantines can slow down the epidemic. And higher rates of testing and health system capacity, or testing, can minimize the epidemic. Just to reiterate, so testing and health system capacity also represents the speed from the moment that one becomes infectious to the moment one is isolated. Okay, so the faster this rate is going, that means the higher the testing and health system capacity is. However, we know that with their effect, we know that they are not sustainable. So for example, CQs are not sustainable. So we cannot go into ECQ forever, even though it is effective in slowing down the epidemic. Likewise, we want higher THSC, but higher THSC means higher cost. So higher, more equipments needed, more contact tracing teams, more isolation beds, etc., etc. And we also know that there is a practical upper bound or practical limit to this intervention. So for example, you cannot go too fast when it comes to testing. So testing takes at least I don't know, X hours. So you cannot go the moment someone becomes infectious to the moment they are isolated. It takes some time. So there is a practical limit to these interventions. So so I've discussed how we can formulate interventions and how the model can predict. These are freely no, this is available in the FASTER website, and then. As an exercise, we want to answer the question. So if we can imagine COVID-19 as a sort of a balancing act, so that means you have interventions, you want to minimize cumulative confirmed, but you cannot go too far. So there is a cost, and then there is and then implementing too much intervention can also be bad. So how do we answer the question, what level and what length of CQ and THSC should be implemented? So as one of the outputs of our project, so this is a paper that we are working on. We do apply optimal control theory to the ODO model that we have. So what is this theory? And this helps us find the optimal level and length of interventions to minimize the number of infections and costs of implementation. So for those who are more mathematically inclined, I refer you to this reference by Lenhart and Workman, Optimal Control Applied to Biological Models. So if we apply this, that we have that they have shown earlier, but however we introduce some refinements. So the lambda, as if you may remember, the lambda letter is now replaced by u sub 1 of t. So for those who are familiar with functions, so we are now replacing the constant parameter with a time varying parameter. Similarly, the rate of transfer from IS to C is now replaced by a time varying parameter as well, U2 of T. So we now want to determine, so in terms of trends, what is the optimal trend, or what is the optimal level of U1 of T and U2 of T throughout time, and then we allow them to vary, so for different periods of time. So to give us an idea, this is the, we want to minimize IA and IS because they are the infectious agents, they propagate the epidemic. And in terms of an optimization problem, this is our, we can say that we want to minimize the integral of the number of infectious individuals plus costs given different constraints, so the ODE model, etc., etc. For a sample result, this is the optimal level of community quarantine that the model or the theory gives us. So, and then this is the optimal testing and health system capacity. So let's talk about the community quarantine. So what does this mean? So we want to have a very high community quarantine for about 30 to 40 days, and then we can sort of relax the community quarantine afterwards. And then for the testing and health system capacity is always almost near the upper bound of 0.5 that we have implemented. So that means we need to be implementing testing and health system capacity rigorously. If we follow this schedule or this control schedule, the resulting active cases will be as follows. So that means we will have a peak of about after 30 days, which is September 15, if we can follow this. And then resulting cumulative cases of around, it will flatten by around 1.2 million, or yeah. And then, so let's discuss now. Josh has talked about how we have been able to localize the model to the Philippine setting. So through that simulation or through those processes, we were able to sort of determine what lambda level is a CQ level, does a CQ level correspond to. So we know that ECQ levels, or ECQ corresponds to a lambda of about between 0.5 to 0.6. And then GCQ is about 0.2 to 0.3. So as we can see, with the relaxation of the ECQ, this means that we are now, we are not at the optimal level of community quarantine. So we are sort of below. And then In terms of testing and health system capacity, so this is the optimal level again. And then in April, this was our capacity through our estimation. So we are at level 0.1. It has improved with the increased testing by the DOH. So we are now at around 0.2. And I think we are improving again this month. However, there is still a gap, okay, so that we need to address. So if we want to do the optimal level of testing. So we have also incorporated a third, this is the newest intervention that we incorporated in the model. So we were able to explore the question, what if we require people to wear masks and wear face shields? So what will happen? So this part of the model has been refined through our derivations, where kappa is the percent reduction in transmission due to intervention, and then eta is the compliance rate. So, so as a conclusion for my talk, I just want to point out that yes, we can represent interventions mathematically by incorporating them as constraints in the ODE model. NPIs or non-pharmaceutical interventions are crucial for controlling the epidemic. CQs, testing, tracing, and isolating strategies have different effects. And given those effects, we can use optimization principles to find the optimal level. And then finally, we need higher levels of CQ and testing, tracing and isolating to control the epidemic. Okay, so that's it for my talk. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Carlo. Okay, so I think we have time. So that ends our first session for today. First of two sessions for today. We now open the floor for questions. Maybe I'll start with the questions raised in the chat box. For the benefit of others who were not able to see the answers, I'll read the questions and the answers now. Number one, can we predict how long asymptomatic will recover? Okay, the answer is at this time, since data on asymptomatic cases are limited, we have relied primarily on the literature values for the recovery rates. May I ask the members of the math team of FASTER, if you have additional answer? Do you have additional answer? Jay, Josh, Carlo, and the other members of the team. By the way, the other members of the team are DJ Benito, also from Ateneo Math Department, Leanne Yao, also from the Math Department. Who else? May nakalimutan ba ako? Si Dr. Timothy Teng, also from the Ateneo Math Department. If you have additional inputs, feel free to add to the answer I gave. Okay. Now, how does it, maybe referring to the SEIR model presented earlier, how does it differ from complex adaptive systems or CAS? The answer of my teammate is it has characteristics of CAS but not designed as a complex adaptive system. Complex adaptive systems are often modeled with agent-based models, which look at individual agents, in this case, people. Instead, we use compartmental models. This look at populations. Okay. Number 3, did your SEIR model include number of people being hospitalized, those in isolation, at home, or in their homes? Actually, these are part of the output of the model, okay, not part of the parameters, okay, and also based on certain assumptions. We will discuss the details tomorrow, day 2 of the conference. Math team, do you have anything to add? Okay. Next question. How will the duration of post-infection immunity affect the parameters in the FASTER model in view of cases of reinfection or relapses? Okay, our answer is, as Dr. J. Macalalag said, one limitation of our SCIR model is that we have not incorporated the possibility of reinfection. I think related studies are still underway. Next, does the model, the SCIR model just presented earlier, take into account how different age groups respond to COVID infection? For example, less than 60 versus 60 and above, recovery and death. Actually, it's not in the SCIR model that we presented earlier. However, we have another SCIR model in the FASTER dashboard, which was developed by our partners from Monash University. And it's an age-structured model. It will be presented on day 3. So if you're interested in the age-structured SCIR model, please listen to the presentation of Dr. James Trower. Okay. Question, were other methods in computing R0 also explored? R0 is the basic reproduction number. For example, maximum likelihood estimates. The answer of our teammate, of our speaker, is we only used NGM to get the estimate for the basic reproductive number. Or maybe Jay, would you like to just give your response? Jay, were you the one who answered?
Yes, I'm the one who answered that question actually. Hello.
Yes, Jay, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Where was that? We only used NGM to get the estimate for that basic reproductive number, and what we did is that the value that we get for R0, we compare that with the values that are found in the literature. However, in computing for the time varying reproductive number, there's another method for that we used, that the team used, and this will be this actually relies on Bayesian estimation, and this will be discussed in the succeeding presentation.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Okay, another question. How do you decouple the natural death rate, or mu, and the death rate due to COVID, that's 𝜖T and 𝜖I, given that many comorbidities increase the chances of infected people dying? How large is the effect of mu in the model? May I ask my teammates?
I can sort of answer the question. I did some sensitivity analysis. So this is a back-end analysis from our part. The mu, or the natural death rate, has a significant effect when you have a very low number of infections. So at the start of the epidemic, March 2020. And then as time went by, the epsilon became more relevant because the number of infections are increasing. And the question is, how do we separate it in terms of comorbidity? We actually calculate it by getting the average number of deaths per day relative to the number of confirmed cases. So that is the comorbidities are also included in that calculation, I would think.
I think choppy ka kanina, Carlo. Can you repeat your last?
Sorry. So for the epsilon, we computed, as Josh pointed out, by the average of deaths per total confirmed cases per day. So everything is accounted for. So any cause of death, so if may comorbidity man or wala, it is incorporated in the calculation or the estimation of epsilon.
Okay, thank you, Carlo. In addition to what Carlo said, another teammate said this can be answered by integrating the effect of age groups in the model. So maybe we can see that when the age-structured model is presented by our partners from Monash University on day 3. Okay. Also, the effect of mu in the model projections is not that significant when considering a short-term simulation, but the effect will be apparent when we do long-term simulation, maybe for more than a year. Okay. Okay. Next question. How will viral mutation affect natural infectivity rates in the equation? Okay. May I ask the members of FASTER to answer? Math team or Dr. Raymond Sarmiento, another member of FASTER.
Thank you, Dr. LV. For that question regarding mutation, the Philippine Genome Center has identified the D614G mutation, and they found the transmission of the virus began thereabouts around July. And although the D614G mutation has been found to be more infectious, limited evidence has shown that it is less fatal than the older version of the virus. In our model, we assume that the population is homogeneous, and thereby those that are infected, those that are sent to the I compartment, either the IA or the IS, were infected with the same virus. However, the mutated D614G virus could potentially explain the rise of cases, as mentioned in the UP PhilHealth webinar series last week on the national virtual town hall meeting with Secretary Duque. Cases were found to have risen somewhat exponentially at the start of July. However, the cases have gone down and have renewed, shall we say, another increase at the start of August. So if you think about it, if we all think about it, the rise of cases was coincidental with the start of the GCQ status. So we cannot really assume that the GCQ status was contributory in terms of the increasing of the cases. But that's something that we will need to look into, specifically because it coincided with the new mutated virus transmission.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Raymond Sarmiento. By the way, Dr. Raymond is the director of UP National Telehealth Center of UP Manila. Okay, thank you, Doc. Next, did the mass recoveries, quote unquote, affect the model? By the way, mass recoveries, I think you're referring to the one-time, big-time announcement of a large number of recoveries. The first one was after May 31. So those who were mild or asymptomatic from January to May 31 were tagged as recovered around end of July, because from the literature, they should have recovered already. But they're not, before the announcement, they were not yet tagged as such. Okay, so can my teammates answer the question? Did the announcement of mass recovery affect the model? Anyone? Okay, I will answer. Actually, we cannot have mass recovery. For example, we cannot have the model cannot have one huge number of recoveries in one day. So what we did was we developed a method of determining the imputed dates for recovery. Okay. At the same time, we also had imputed date of onset of the disease, date of specimen collection, and so on. So in other words, we try to distribute the recovered cases through time before the announcement in order to have in order to have a smooth distribution of recoveries. Okay. Next, have you considered limitations on parameters? Of course. Or have you considered all possible parameters which may contribute the spread of the COVID cases and later on disregard the non-significant parameters? May I ask anyone from the team to answer the question? Anyone? Okay. There's an answer here. Our model was designed to reflect disease transmission dynamics. As shown by Dr. J. Macalalag, this was based on a system of differential equations. Significant testing relies on different set of modeling assumptions, so this was not performed. However, we did test several possible model designs, and the current FASTEL model achieved the best fit among candidate models. So actually, it was a long process. From day one, we had our initial model, and then we reviewed, revised, and so on. So after several months, March, April, May, June, July, I think we have gone, our model has gone through a lot of revisions and reviews and revisions. So maybe it's not yet perfect, but it's better than what we had at the start. Okay. Question. May I know how the parameters of the model were fitted? Maybe our speaker, Josh, can answer this. Josh?
Hello, sorry. Yeah, I was just unmuting. So yeah, as I had explained in the presentation, the specific algorithm we're using is called 𝗷𝗫FGS. But yeah, so not to get into the details of that though, the main idea was we wanted to minimize the squared error between model projections and actual data points. In order to choose the final framework, we also considered other algorithms such as genetic algorithms and simulated annealing. And ultimately, we looked at the best performing frameworks, which also had the least runtime. So there, yes, yun po.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Josh. Okay. Next question. Are we able to predict the time varying reproduction number RT for each time an intervention such as quarantine, wearing of face masks or face shields is being implemented? Actually, as mentioned by by Carlo, we recently incorporated this this type of intervention in our model. But for RT, I'm not sure. But Dr. Tim Teng and Mr. Robert Leong will discuss the details of RT later. So maybe they can answer this question later. Okay. Though I do not have any idea about FASTER, ito na lang. Sorry, hindi ko maintindihan. For Sir Carlo, shouldn't quick contract tracing also affect the delta A? Carlo, would you like to answer?
Hi, yes. So the delta S, which is one of the main interventions or representation of interventions, is affected by 3 factors. So contact tracing, testing, and then isolation. So the speed of those 3 processes will account for the delta S. So the faster these 3 processes are, the higher the value of our intervention.
Thank you, Carlo. Okay. Question, since we had this COVID-19 for about 5 months now, can we assume that you already have enough data to use in predicting which of the identified interventions will work best in stemming the increase of cases and the most effective way to implement them? May I ask my teammates to answer? Actually, I won't say enough data because every day we seem to find new dynamics in the number of cases. Okay. In fact, during the first few months that we were doing the modeling, our model tends to overestimate the number of cases. But recently, we realized nag-underestimate na. So we go back to our model, our parameters, review, and then make adjustments and so on. So the question of having enough data, I'm not sure if we have seen it all already. But for predicting which of the identified interventions will work best, I think our model is able to show which intervention will work or will help at least decrease the daily increment in the number of cases. However, we can only give possibilities. We can only run the model and then present some numbers, but we're not the decision makers. So the final decision is still with the government officials. Okay. But again, because we're working with models are not perfect. In fact, all models are wrong. Okay, but some of them are very useful. Okay, in fact, I think the SCRR model is very useful in showing which intervention works better than the others. Okay, teammates, do you have additional answers?
Hello,
Okay.
Doc LV. Yeah,
Yes, yes.
sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I think just to add lang po, it's not that there is one single best strategy, but what our model allows us to consider is how different strategies can be combined. And when we present that data to policymakers, they're able to look at the different combinations and consider that those policy combinations in conjunction with other factors, so like the costs and how long those would be implemented, etc. So there's no single best strategy, but there are many ways of combining different strategies based on our model.
Thank you, Josh. Okay, there are a lot of questions. Nauunahan ako. Okay, on the time series model, maybe Carlo, you can answer this. On the time series projection, the base scenario details, how do you explain the assumption of 19% health system capacity parameter?
So we compute delta S, as Josh pointed out, by getting the inverse of the number of days it takes for someone to be isolated from their date of onset of symptoms. Okay, so if it takes 5 days for someone to become isolated, tested and isolated from their initial symptoms, then that means the delta S, we estimate that to be 1/5, so around 0.2. So currently last July we estimate that it is 0.19, 19% health capacity.
Thank you, Carlo. Next question. Does the 2-week ECQ, actually, I think that's MECQ in NCR. Does the 2-week MECQ or did the 2-week MECQ decrease the transmission of the infection? Do we have the data? Anyone who can answer the question? Maybe we can talk about the transmission rate. In terms of transmission rate, when we fitted to the data, yes, there was a decrease in the transmission rate. But of course, the numbers keep on increasing. But I was referring to the transmission rate, not the actual number of cases. Okay. Okay, I think we have no more time. There are other questions here. Okay, but we don't have time anymore. Andre?
Hi, ma'am. Thank you, Doc LV, and thank you to all the speakers of the first session of this morning. No, there will be more opportunities to ask questions, and it's a 3-day webinar as well. No. So thank you for participating in that first session of the morning. It's time to have a 5-minute break. We will resume at 10:40. No, please don't leave. There's more to come. See you in 5 minutes. Good morning, everyone. Just a time check, everyone. It's officially 10:36. We'll see you again in 4 minutes. Salamat. Hello. Good morning again, everyone. That was a short break. Sana naman sulit sa inyo yung break na yon. We'll now formally start with another unlocking session with Dr. Rina Estuar, the project leader of FASTER, to moderate this second session of the morning. Hello again, Doc Rins.
Hi, Andre. Thank you. Okay, let me introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is an associate professor of the Ateneo Loyola School's Health Sciences program and the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health. He is also the chair of the Drug Price Advisory Council, as well as the chair of Epimetrics. Let us now listen to Dr. John Wong as he discusses the LGU Risk Classification Index. Dr. Wong?
Hello, good afternoon. Good morning. So I'd like to share the indicators that we have we're using for the LGU epidemic response framework. I'll share my slides. Can you see my slides?
Yes, Dr. Wong.
Thank you. Okay. So we'll present a couple of metrics that we're using now for measuring the new outbreak. Now, some of these are in the FASTER dashboard. Now, some of these we present to the IATF to guide them also. So the two that we're using in the FASTER dashboard are called doubling time and critical care utilization rate now. And then there are a couple of others that we also use to monitor the outbreak now. And I'll show you how we use these as inputs for the LGU epidemic response framework, which is a framework used to guide LGUs in how to respond to the epidemic. So traditionally, we use this, the epidemic curve, to track an epidemic. So this is time or date graphed against the number of cases per day. So this is actually very useful because it shows the magnitude of the outbreak and also the time course of the epidemic. It can tell you whether the epidemic is getting worse or getting better. And it can also tell you what is the effect of your interventions. However, one limitation of this is it's not directly quantifiable. So if you need a framework for classifying LGUs according to risk levels and response, you need something that can be quantifiable. So we introduced the use of this measure called doubling time. So doubling time is a measure of the speed of an outbreak or the growth rate of an outbreak. So here we graph also the number, the time, or the number of days since the start of the outbreak against the number of patients. However, we also measure this against several doubling timelines. So, for example, going from left to right, the green line is a doubling time of 3 days, followed by 7 days, and followed by 30 days. So, depending on where your epidemic curve is, or epidemic doubling timeline is in relation to these 3 lines, you know whether your outbreak is speeding up, is stagnant, or is slowing down. So, for example, this is the case and mortality doubling times at the national level. I think this is updated now. So, so here we see that the epidemic actually started very fast in the early days, early months. It has slowed down since, but but it has persistently remained near the 7-day line. No, it has been a bit stubborn about going or slowing down towards the 30-day line. No? I'll show you some regional lines later on that show where some regions have slowed down. No? So this is a collection of case doubling time and mortality doubling timelines that show the speed in different regions. No? So as we know, most of the cases are concentrated in the NCR. No? So the NCR case and mortality doubling times actually reflect the national CDTs and MBTs. No? One thing to note here, which I will discuss also much later, is recently, you see that the line doesn't go straight anymore. No, it has actually sped up, so that it's closer now to the 7-day line compared to the 30-day line. So this reflects the recent surge in cases since June. These are the lines for Luzon, leaving out NCR and its neighboring provinces. You see also a recent growth or speeding up of the case doubling time. For Visayas, the scale is actually much different. So if you go back here to NCR, the scale is in the hundreds of thousands. But in Visayas, it's just in the tens of thousands. So we know that Visayas had a bad outbreak sometime in May, but it has since improved. So you see this. You see this line. In the early days of the outbreak, Visayas actually had very few mortalities, but because of the surging cases last May, its mortality has increased, but has since slowed down. And Mindanao is altogether a different case, because again, instead of a scale of 100 or 10,000, the scale is 1,000. Similarly to at the national level, it has always had a slow outbreak, except recently, where it has sped up a little. So aside from the lines, this is also how we report the case doubling times to the IATF. So these are CDT values in terms of days. So for example, for NCR, this shows that from initial baseline of doubling every 2.5 days, now it's 10 days. And it's decelerated by 7.5 days. This is for mortality doubling time. Again, from 4 days to 15 days. However, there are limitations in the use of CDT and MDT. When the numbers are small, as in early in the outbreak, doubling is much faster. When the numbers get bigger, it takes longer to double, even though your outbreak is still increasing in number, and the numbers are quite large. This is more clearly seen here, this phenomenon. So sometime in June, we had a rapid. This is the epidemic. This is the cumulative cases. Sometime in June, we had a rapid surge in cases, but it was not reflected in the case doubling time. So the orange dotted line is the case doubling time if we had maintained the same growth rate, April, May, because of the surging cases, it did speed up, move towards the 7-day line, but the difference was very small, barely noticeable, unless you have a comparison. So we're currently working on developing other new indicators that are more sensitive, to supplement the doubling time indicator. So the other input indicator for the LGU epidemic response framework is critical care utilization rate. So here we're measuring utilization of several components of critical care, mechanical ventilators, ICU rooms, and isolation beds. So we measure this at the regional level because the capacity at provincial level is actually very low. So provinces have established a referral network together with the regional hospitals of DOH in order to share resources and prevent their hospitals from being overwhelmed. So utilization rate is simply the number of, let's say, mechanical ventilators being used compared to the total ventilators available in that region. So we set sort of rail guards. So this is the warning zone, and this is the danger zone, 30% and 70%. So if you're at this level, this is a safe zone. When you're at this level, you know that your hospitals are close to being overwhelmed. And when you're at this level, this is already the danger zone. So using more than 70% of your isolation beds, and you have very little reserve capacity. So actually, when the group of doctors called for a timeout, all three, this is not an updated graph now, all three critical care components were actually at the danger zone line. So it was appropriate to go to MECQ. There are other metrics that we use, although not in the not necessarily used in the epidemic response framework. So we also track new cases relative to total cases. So if the proportion remains steady, you would have a straight line. We saw that early, at about the time that ECQ was imposed, there was a drop, meaning an improvement, but that drop has since leveled off. So we're no longer seeing the initial effect or initial improvement from ECQ. This is the positivity rate for our PCR test. So it's also a measure of how efficient you have been in applying your test. So you should be testing symptomatic people first, before asymptomatic patients. So if there's if you still have a lot of undetected cases, every additional case you test will have a higher probability of being positive. So right now we actually came from about maybe 7-8%. We're about 11% now. So we're doing more tests, but the positivity rate is also high, meaning we're also detecting a lot of positive cases, infected cases. This is the testing gap. It shows us how much more testing we need to do in order to bring positivity rate down to 5%. So positivity rate is what the WHO says is adequate control of your epidemic. So we're still a long way from there. So finally, so this is how we integrate the different indicators. So we use the two indicators to classify LGUs in terms of risk level. So because of the phenomenon of fewer cases giving high doubling times, we first segment provinces into those with small number of cases and large outbreaks. So if they have a few number of cases, we don't use doubling time. We just use critical care utilization rate to classify them against by risk level. So the phases of the epidemic are recognition. When you have few cases, let's say, an imported case, no? Let's say a returning OSW, no? Then you move on to initiation phase when you have more cases, no? That were produced, more secondary cases produced by the initial introduction of the infected individual. And if you're unable to control this, your cases run out of control, no? And then you start having clusters. No? So this is the acceleration phase, no? When the outbreak really speeds up. No? When you've been able to control it, no? The number of cases decline, and this is your deceleration phase. No? Until it goes back to just a few sporadic cases now. So this is when you prepare for the next cycle of the outbreak. No? And we expect this cycle to repeat, no? Until we have the vaccine. No? So these phases of the epidemic are also classified in terms of risk level. No? Low, moderate, high, and then back to moderate and low. Okay. So if the outbreak is large in a province, no, we start using CBT in combination with CUR, no, as classification criteria, no, and these are the cutoffs. Okay, so once an LGU knows at which risk level it is at, no, then there are corresponding strategies that they should apply. No? So if you just have a few number of cases, your risk level is low, your focus should be containment, no? Which is testing of symptomatic individuals, contact tracing, and effective isolation and quarantine. No? However, if you lose control of that cluster or that outbreak, no, your risk level moves up to moderate, no? And you have to consider stronger measures, no? So like closing of schools, no? Closing of workplaces, wearing a face mask, no? Social distancing. No? If your cases continue to rise, no? And your critical care utilization rate goes near the danger level, no? Then you have to apply community quarantine, no? Enhanced community quarantine, which is what we did. No? Eventually, if you get control, you can step down until it's low enough na you have time to, again, no, prepare your both public health and hospital system, hospitals now for the next cycle. No? I think that's the last. Yeah, that's my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. Please stay on for the Q&A. We will have two presenters, and then after that, we will open the session for the Q&A. Okay, let me introduce our next presenter. Timothy Teng, or Dr. Tim, completed his undergraduate degree in management engineering cum laude in Ateneo de Manila University. He then earned his doctorate degree in mathematics from the same university in 2012. Timothy is currently an assistant professor of the Ateneo Mathematics Department and has been involved with the FASTER team since March. His recent publications include topics in stochastic integration theory, uncertainty theory, and disease modeling using differential equations. Let us all listen to Tim as he discusses RT, or time-varying reproductive number, using FQS.
Right. Can you hear me? Good morning, everyone.
Yes, Tim.
Yes.
Well,
right. So I just would like to share my slides in the other computer. Right. So good morning, everyone. So my talk for today will tackle the time varying reproduction number, or RT in FASTER. And basically, I've been discussing an overview of the tool that was used to compute for RT, which is 𝗜𝗶. Right. So before we begin our discussion on RT, we may have to recall the concept of the basic reproductive number, or reproduction number, R0. So R0 represents the number of secondary cases one infectious individual will produce in a completely susceptible population. And when we do stability analysis on epidemic models, we derive a formula for R0, which is based on the given model parameters. So as Dr. Macalalag showed you earlier, we had the formula for R0, and it was derived using the next generation matrix. R0 can then be used as a threshold value wherein the disease will spread in the community when R0 is greater than 1, and it dies out when R0 is less than 1. So generally, we make statements regarding disease-free or endemic equilibrium in relation to this value of R0. However, the problem with R0 is that it doesn't take into account the degree in which the disease spreads in real time. It is a static measure that's dependent on parameter values that reflect conditions typically at the beginning of an epidemic, where the population is entirely susceptible. It does not reflect the interventions or any behavioral changes that have taken place or are taking place since the beginning of the epidemic. So to address these limitations, we have to consider a different measure that considers real-time changes in disease transmissibility, and this will be provided by the time-varying reproduction number, R sub t. It's sometimes referred to as instantaneous reproduction number or effective reproduction number. And this measure represents the average number of people that a newly infectious case at time t will produce, assuming that the conditions remain the same as they were at that time, or if the conditions from that point will persist moving forward. Unlike the basic reproduction number, RT is not a one-time computation. It is a measure that is computed daily and hence takes into account implementation of control measures, intervention strategies imposed by the government, and changing susceptibility of the population. Because, as mentioned, recovered cases or recovered individuals will develop some level of immunity after acquiring the disease. There are several means to compute or to estimate time-varying reproduction number, but for the case of FASTER, the 𝗜𝗶 package is one of the tools used to compute for this measure. So just a brief overview on 𝗜𝗶. So the theory and the tools behind this package can be seen from this main reference, a new framework and software to estimate time-varying reproduction numbers during epidemics. So this is by 𝗪𝗏, Fraser, and other researchers from Imperial College London. The reference provided some results of RT computations using the tool that they developed, the 𝗜𝗶, involving several diseases in different places, such as the 1861 measles epidemic in Germany and the 2003 SARS outbreak in Hong Kong. So the 𝗜𝗶 has been used by a number of researchers to study COVID-19. And if anyone is interested to see how they work, you may actually refer to the following links, which are also referred to or given in the article. So there's an Excel program that you can use to compute for RT. So it's basically the user-friendly version, wherein it enables you to it gives us an initial understanding of how RT is derived, and it lays out there the things that are needed to generate this value. But if you want to generate daily values, it is better to use the R program or the R package, as it allows for automation of the RT output. So next we go to the mathematical basics, which will also include the inputs needed to compute for RT. So to compute for RT, I guess the main driver for this would be the incidence numbers, the daily number of cases that we should use to compute for RT. Ideally, since it's a measure of disease transmissibility, ideally, the number of cases based on date of infection should be used. Okay, but that's the ideal scenario. The problem is it's difficult to observe when people catch or obtain the infection. So as a substitute, time series of cases based on symptoms, hospitalization, or seroconversion can be used instead. Okay, you just have to be aware of the limitations or caveats whenever you use a particular type of time series of cases. Although based on the reference itself by Ann Corey, they are suggesting the use of cases based on symptom onset date in the computation for the time varying RT. And since we're mainly using symptom onset date as basis, you also need the serial interval distribution to compute for RT. When you talk of the serial interval, this is the time between onset of symptoms from a primary case to a secondary case. The serial interval distribution is actually meant to take the place, or it's a substitute for the generation time interval distribution, which is the ideal in computing for RT. However, as in the case of counting the number of cases based on date of infection, generation time interval is also difficult to estimate. Right. So when we speak of generation time interval, by the way, it refers to time between infections from a primary case to a secondary case. Okay, but since that's difficult to observe, we're going to use serial interval distribution instead. And then next, we'll talk about the distribution of RT. So ultimately, RT is a random variable that will have a distribution, and the distribution will be derived based on the following terms or expressions. So first is we need, so we let IT represent the number of new cases at time step t. Next, we let WS represent the probability of a secondary case arising at time period S after the primary case. This will be based on the serial interval distribution. And then we let lambda sub t, which is equal to this weighted average. So it represents total infection potential across all infected individuals at time t. Okay, so this is actually expressed as a weighted average of the past incidence numbers, and it's weighted by the probability values given by W1, W2, and so on, which again is based on the serial interval distribution. Anyone who has been confirmed to be COVID positive will have a contribution to lambda sub t, but the contribution of those infected, let's say, even a month ago, a few months ago, or even just a month ago, will be very, very close to zero, because the corresponding probability, W sub S, for those cases will be close to zero already. And so as you can see here, the number of cases at time step t will actually follow a Poisson distribution with mean given by the product R sub t lambda sub t. And in which case, if you isolate R sub t, that's just equal to this ratio of the expected value of I sub t and the total infection potential across all infected individuals. So if we treat t, let's say t as a present time, then RT, roughly speaking, is a ratio between present day cases. Okay, so present day cases over some weighted average of the past case numbers, with the idea that previous infections contribute to the number of infections in present day. Now we know that resulting RT estimates can be highly variable and hence difficult to interpret when the time step of data is small. So the trend line for RT tends to become a bit more jagged when you use a small time step size. So to smoothen this out, we calculate the R sub t over longer time windows under the assumption that instantaneous reproduction number is constant within that time window. Okay, so these estimates denoted by RT tau, okay, quantify the average transmissibility over a time window tau ending at time t. So the R sub t that's actually reflected in the FASTER dashboard actually refers to RT tau, okay, where the RT value computed at a particular time is applicable over a period of tau days. Right. And then if transmissibility is assumed constant over this time period, over a span of tau days, the likelihood of incidence during this period, so the likelihood of obtaining the sequence of incidences, given the parameter, the reproduction number RT tau, conditional on the previous incidences, is given by this expression. So ultimately, what you have here is the Poisson likelihood. You have a Poisson likelihood for this sequence of incidences given the reproduction number R sub t tau. And then using a Bayesian framework, and if we assume a gamma distributed prior for RT tau with scale and shape parameters A and B respectively, then along with the Poisson likelihood for the incidences, you'll end up with a posterior distribution for RT tau given past incidence data and conditional on WS to be gamma distributed with the following parameters. Okay, so the parameters will involve the prior parameters A and B along with the incidence numbers and the probabilities WS. In particular, the posterior mean for RT tau based on the posterior distribution will be given by this ratio. Okay, so this adjusted posterior, so this posterior mean is an adjustment after considering, after incorporating this time window tau, along with the prior parameters A and B. Right, so some adjustments or some assumptions and adjustments when we compute for our time variant reproduction number. So here we're using a time window of tau equals 7, so over a span of 1 week. So whenever we compute for the time variant reproduction number, the obtained value is applicable over the past 7 days. And then the prior distribution for RT, we're just using gamma distribution, which is based on the main reference by 𝗏𝗀𝗁. But for the mean, for the prior mean, we're using the R0 of the region, and which is consistent with supposedly consistent with the SEIR models that we have, and standard deviation of 2 based on this reference by Abbott. Okay, so you have here the values for R0 for 3.5 for the entire PH and CR region 7, and then 2.5 for the other regions. Serial interval distribution, we're using a variable distribution with mean 4.8, standard deviation 2.3. This is by Nishura. Although other references, well, oftentimes they either use the variable distribution, log normal, or gamma distribution for the serial interval, but here we're just using variable based on this reference. Right, so as mentioned, we're using number of cases based on symptom onset. Okay, so to estimate RT, and symptom onset is used. Cases were tracked down starting from March 1, and we begin computing for the time variant reproduction number. So we're computing for RT tau, actually, at the point when cumulative cases reaches 12. So this number is recommended by by the main reference, by Corey, There are, however, missing entries for date of symptom onset in the data provided. Okay, so to resolve this, we imputed the missing dates using the predictive mean matching method. Moreover, there are those tagged as symptomatic among the confirmed cases. So in order to account for these cases in the incidence numbers, and since they are symptomatic, they cannot really have a symptom onset date. So as a proxy, we use the specimen collection date instead. Okay, so to incorporate these symptomatic people in the case numbers, we use a specimen collection date. So at least through this date, we're already assured that these people are already or surely infected at that point. Just a quick word on the predictive mean matching method. Okay, so there's a subgroup within the FASTER team that does the imputation. So they first went through several imputation methods, presented it to the team, and then ultimately settled on the predictive mean matching method, or PMM for short. PMM uses actual observed values as replacement for missing data based on certain features or information such as age, reporting month, symptoms, and so on. The observed values that we refer to here are onset delays, meaning time between symptom onset date and specimen collection date. The PMM will be implemented multiple times, and the average of the iterations will serve as the imputed onset delay. For symptomatic cases, the imputed delay is subtracted from the date of specimen collection date to determine the imputed date of onset. So we're using date of specimen collection date as sort of like an anchor, and then we incorporate the imputed delay so that we will arrive at the imputed date of onset for symptomatic cases. For asymptomatic cases, on the other hand, the imputed date of onset will just be based on the specimen collection date. Now, a limitation in the data provided, and that is due to the nature of, I guess, the case number, or just due to the nature of the case numbers that you're using, is that daily incidences for the most recent dates do not include all cases. This is because there's a delay between symptom onset and case confirmation. Okay, so basically, if you check, let's say, if you check the number of cases based on symptom onset today, most likely you'll just get a value of 0 because COVID-positive individuals who experience symptoms today may not yet have taken an RT-PCR test, or they have already taken the test, but they're still waiting confirmation of the results. So there's this natural delay that happens in the reporting of cases based on symptom onset. So to accommodate this delay, the RT presented in the dashboard uses a 14-day cutoff. This means that the trend for RT is shown up until the point 2 weeks ago from the present day. Right. So the output the output that you get after using the EPS team package is something like this. This is one of the epidemic curves featured in the FASTER dashboard. As you can see, there are several trend lines in this output. So we note that the green line here represents the incidence numbers based on symptom onset date. The solid red line that you see here basically refers to the median value of RT tau. Okay. Earlier, I showed you the posterior mean for RT tau, but what's being shown in the FASTER dashboard or by the EPS team package is actually the median. Although the mean and the median will tend to be very, very close to each other, especially when the incidence numbers are large already. Okay. And then you also have the red dashed lines. You have the upper and lower red dashed lines, which actually refer to the upper and lower bounds of the time varying RT based on the 95% credible interval. Right. So just some other remarks or concluding remarks. Again, RT refers to the degree in which people get infected with the disease. But since case numbers are based on symptom onset date, we may have to consider a time lag based on the incubation period. Okay, so RT values are time lag with the incubation period. Okay, we have to consider time lag from the start of infection till the end of the incubation stage when the symptoms manifests. Okay, the second point is, I guess, a rather obvious limitation, but it's worth mentioning. Does not take into account all infectious people in the population that contribute to the spread of the disease. The computed RT ultimately is dependent on the number of tests, in a way, dependent on the number of tests that are conducted and that we're able to detect. Also, as mentioned earlier in the SCRR model, infectiousness is assumed to be of the same level for both symptomatic and asymptomatic cases. There was a recent article, I think from Korea, that the viral load for symptomatic and asymptomatic cases is almost at the same level for both classes, for both tags. Of course, viral load is not equivalent to viral shedding, but at least it lends, it gives an idea that asymptomatic cases may potentially be as infectious as those who are symptomatic. And then we note that, lastly, this pandemic is a multifaceted phenomenon, and the RT captures only an aspect of it. So we shouldn't just simply focus on what RT is saying, but we also have to look at other indicators to have a better picture of this epidemic. Right. So these are some of the references that I used, or that we used, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tim. To Dr. Wong and Dr. Tim, we may not have time to go live for the Q&A, so may I just request you to continue answering the inquiries through the chat box. Thank you. Let me now introduce our last speaker for today's session. Robert Neil Leong is a PhD student in the School of Public Health and Community Medicine of the University of New South Wales, Australia. His thesis is on the epidemiology of pertussis in Australia and economic evaluation of alternative vaccination strategies against the disease. A statistician by training, he obtained his Bachelor of Science and Master of Science degrees in statistics from the Mathematics and Statistics Department of the De La Salle University, Philippines. Robert is a biostatistician and a mathematical epidemiologist who has published in Scopus Index international journals. Currently, he is involved in both independent and commissioned COVID-19 initiatives, such as the Leads for Health, Security and Resilience Consortium, and the World Health Organization Pacific Regional Office as a contributor to measuring epidemiological metrics. Direct from New South Wales, let us listen to Robert as he discusses the EpiNow package. Robert?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the kind invitation. To be honest, I feel a bit pressured presenting because not only I come from a rival University of Ateneo, but rather also one more thing, I'm looking for a way to share my screen. Okay. It was supposed to be my supervisors who will be presenting, but because they're not available, so I am left with the tasks, and I hope I don't shortchange you. But anyway, thank you for the kind introductions, and here is my talk. So basically, this talk will just be building on top of what Dr. Tim has already discussed a while ago, which is on the EpiNow package, which basically is a new methodology to estimate, or I would just say a little bit improvement of a methodology to estimate RT, which is still based on EpiEstim, but after accounting for a couple of issues that EpiEstim has, which I think Dr. Tim has also highlighted. So, okay, so, oh, there we go. So you can see my screen, right? So yeah, before I begin my talk, this is just to acknowledge all the other groups and all the
people who made this collaboration possible, which basically is the modeling consortium by WIPRO and the WHO Philippine Country Office, as well as the FASTER group for your kind invitation, and as well as the other consortium that I am currently involved in. So Dr. Tim has already discussed what the effective reproduction number is, RT, and just to recall, it is just basically a measure. You can look at it as a measure of your instantaneous measure of the level of transmission and potentially reflecting the changes in transmission in real time of your current epidemic. So basically, the thing about RT is that you would want this to be working on as minimal parametric assumptions as much as possible. So what do I mean by that? You would want to measure RT in such a way that you use the minimum number of assumptions possible. For instance, one of the things why 𝗵𝗆 now and 𝗵𝗆-Estim in particular is a good tool or a good methodology framework to measure RT is because they are not sensitive to the structure of the disease spread. In other words, it doesn't really matter what your compartmental model structure is for RT. You can work rather with the disease. You can work with SIR types or SEIR types or whatever. RT, at least using their framework, will still be more or less stable or robust. Now, one other good thing about RT is that, as Dr. Tim highlighted, you only rely on cases itself. You see, because this is a measure, an indicator which measures transmission potential in real time. All you need to have in this case is just your case counts, or basically any other thing that will be reflective of case counts and how they spread in the community. But as we all know, all estimation methods, regardless of whatever framework you use, will be reliant on data and likewise on the inherent biases of that data and as well as the data quality. So for instance, one thing about case data is that we all know that there is some delay, reporting delay that happens. Basically, when you have case data reported today, it does not necessarily reflect that the case was found to have happened today, or rather they would have been infected today. As much as possible, as Dr. Tim highlighted, we would want it to be reflective of at least the onset date or the onset date of the symptoms. In fact, not only that, we would want to be specifically reflective. We would want it to be specifically reflective of the actual time that the infection happened. But of course, it is near impossible to measure. One other bias with measuring RT, which is supposed to be conducted in real time, is that we're also observing right truncation of data. What do we mean by this right truncation? So for instance, we would want to measure RT today. Of course, the number of cases that we have today is not reflective of all the cases that has been observed so far, because not only this is aside from the issue of underreporting, but rather there are still cases or rather tests which are yet to receive the results. And these results, if they will turn out to be positive in future time, will obviously not be reflected in what you have today, hence right truncation. And likewise, you will also have issues about missing cases, testing saturation, and of course, with case data, if you're only working with case series data, it does not really it does not necessarily reflect testing capacity. If you just work on case data, you have to supplement it with your, say, for example, test data or testing data, so on and so forth. And one more thing about the effective reproduction number is that currently with the frameworks that we are using, they are only assuming a local to local transmission, meaning to say that your cases are all locally acquired and locally transmitted, which obviously you should make for that adjustment if you are to use these framework, because the RT that you are getting out of these would again just reflect locally acquired cases or local community transmission. So in other words, you have to account for, by accounting for, you have to remove as much as possible under these frameworks the effect of imported cases or imported cases, which is exactly what 𝗜HI now is trying to do as an improvement over 𝗑STIM. So in other words, how 𝗜HI now, 𝗜HI now is a tool developed by the London School or Imperial College. Forgot. I'm sorry, but it is the same reference by Sam Abbott, which Dr. Tim has also highlighted a while ago. So basically, what 𝗜HI now does is that it still uses 𝗜HI-STIM as its in the computation of RT, but only after adjusting for some of the issues that we have that I have identified, which is basically number 1, reporting delays, number 2, right truncation, and the separation of imported and local cases, if data exists to separate those two out. And likewise, one thing about 𝗜HI now is that it is also able to, part of its underlying is that under the results, it is also able to project the trajectory of the number of infections, and likewise infer the rate of spread, which is then converted to doubling time in a probabilistic manner. And on top of this, 𝗜HI now also incorporates a forecasting methodology, which allows it to more or less forecast RT based on most recent data. And that forecasting methodology is based on an ensemble of time series models, which includes 𝗙BATS, ARIMA, and I forgot the other one. And based on these forecasts of RTs, it is then translated back to forecasting what would have been, or what we would expect had conditions been the same, the trajectory of your incident cases. So how does it work? So quickly, so what happens is that we start with cases data, and with these cases data, normally we receive cases with the dates of with just the reported date of confirmation of these cases, and then based on a line list of some data, whenever they are available, we will be fitting an onset, a reporting delay distribution, which accounts for the onset to reporting delay, and then further adjust that to reflect the incubation period. Because take note that as Dr. Tim has mentioned, one thing about 𝗜HI-STIM is that it works on serial interval, when in fact we should be working with generation interval. So what's the difference? Just to recall, serial interval is a measure of the time between onset of symptoms between two successive cases, say a primary case infecting another case, and what we take the two onset dates of their symptoms and see how they are different, which by nature can be negative, which poses so what does it mean? So in other words, say if the infection came from me, and then I pass it on to another person, it can happen that the person that I pass it to will show symptoms before I show my own symptoms, which makes serial intervals negative and can pose some issues in adjusting for your delays later on. But generation intervals are never negative, because we are actually looking for the infection onsets, basically the actual date that they are infected, and which accounts for the incubation period of that disease, or of that infection. So, and that is what we want to use. Now, is it an issue? Is it an issue to use serial interval compared to generation interval? The paper by Corey, which is basically the basis of 𝗜HI-STIM, showed that it will not be an issue as long as incubation periods are very short. But with COVID-19, there are some works that incubation period can be as low as 3 days or 5 days, or even can be as high as 14 days. So it is highly variable. So that's the reason why, just to be on the safer side, we would want to be able to also adjust for the incubation period, which is also available in the 𝗜HI now framework. So that is the overview of 𝗜HI now. And And just as an exercise, just a simple exercise, we tried to apply this in the Philippines by using the same defaults for the serial interval as discussed by Dr. Tim. Basically the one, I think it was the gamma distribution by basically the R0 of 2.5 and a standard deviation of 2, and likewise the prior estimate for R0. And we try to produce estimates for LGUs as much as possible, as long as they meet the case limits that we set, because obviously if a particular location does not meet the case limit that we set, which in this case is 40 in the last 7 days, estimates will not become stable. So we drop them. And the latest data that we have for this, or at least the one for this talk, is 19th of August. So I did on that. And likewise, as I said, with what we have done, we assume that the case counts are complete and, as mentioned, reflective of the assumptions that I just basically mentioned a while ago. And one thing about 𝗍𝗑 now compared to 𝗍𝗑 is that if you put them vis-a-vis, side by side, you will notice that while they more or less will give you the same trend, the thing about 𝗍𝗑 now is that it produces numbers, rather it produces a graph which is shifted to the left compared to 𝗍𝗑, just because it is also able to account for the reporting delays and the other delays that I have just mentioned. So what does it mean? So I'm not sure with how the FASTER dashboard has done it. It appears that they have already adjusted for it in with 𝗍𝗑. But by default, what 𝗍𝗑 does is that if the count if a particular RT is measured or estimated by 𝗍𝗑 for today, it will assign it to be the value for today. But in principle, it is not supposed to be the case, just because what you measure now or what you observe now does not exactly reflect the situation today, but rather reflects on average the situation of your mean reporting delay, or basically what happened, say 9 days in the past, on average, because of it takes at least 9 days from onset of infection to the time that they were reported. At least that is what we found with the data that we have. So that is why the 𝗍𝗑 now is terming their estimates as a nowcast by basically adjusting for these delays in terms of presenting the results. So just to give you an example of what an output would be, here is the one that we produced for the Philippines as a whole. So in this case, the panel A are your daily number of infections, wherein your vertical bars, the vertical brown bars, are the actual data, and the blue plot would be reflective of the darker shade in the middle, would be the 50% credible interval for the number of cases as projected by what would we have expected had RT been projected this way. And the lighter shade is 90% credible intervals, or more or less, if you consider a distribution, the distribution of all possible counts for that particular day, 50% of them will fall inside that particular distribution, just because we're working with that Bayesian because likewise we're working with the Bayesian framework. You can also interpret this as more or less this is the there is a 50% probability that your actual number of cases would be under the conditions set by your RT would fall within these darker blue regions, and likewise the lighter regions would be 90%. And the gray shades are the projections moving forward based on the projection, the forecast model of 𝗍𝗑 now. So as you would see, there are some days wherein we also produced we also produce forecasts for days wherein we already have data, but it is because, remember, we are now casting 9 days back. So in doing the forecast, the first 9-day forecast is actually just on the days when data is still available, and beyond, in which case we set it at 2 weeks ahead. We're also able to forecast it beyond. So the panel B is what is actually what we are after, the 𝗵 now, rather the RT estimates. And as you would see, it appears that based on data that we have collected, we are able to bring down RT from high of 3 or 2.5 early on when the epidemic started, which say at around late February to early March, to a number hovering around 1. But due to some increase in cases reflective of I think there were some either it could have reflected increased testing capacity or actual increase in community transmission. RT has went slightly back up above 1 before slowing down right to around 1 levels in recently. So not only we will be able to produce estimates for the national level, but again, as long as data is case counts are available, we can also do it for the regional level. Say this is the one for Metro Manila. I will not delve into the details further, but because this is just a simple exercise of showing what it can do. And likewise, not only that, you can also have a summary of all the outputs automatically generated to you by 𝗵 now, which in this case is basically a side-by-side comparison of all the regions we estimated RT for, and provided a figure summarizing all of them so that you can easily compare them. And yes, they are also color coded to reflect the likelihood based on our estimates. So increasing would be suggestive of, well, basically increase. We expect outbreak to be we expect the epidemic to be growing for that particular region, and it would be highlighted by red. And how do they measure increasing? If there is if the probability that it is increase, or rather, what I call this. But basically, they are still working on the same credible intervals that I shown you. So if they are on the upper end, I'm sorry. What's that? Oh, okay. So I'll just continue. And likewise, you can also produce the same thing for LGUs, for even more local levels, as long as again case counts are met, or case limits are met. But what happens if you have small case counts? So this is an example that we found with Iligan City in the northern Mindanao region. So as you would see, you will not be getting a very smooth, rather a smooth set of estimates. And likewise, your credible intervals are very, or basically you will have a lot of uncertainties, which obviously is not useful for policy makers. So this is one issue with 𝗵 now, even after all the improvement that this has done on top of 𝗵 estim. So some takeaways of the simple exercise that we have conducted is that while it did show that the initial lockdowns appear to have successfully mitigated the exponential growth of the epidemic, leading to more stable case numbers, but it appears that in the recent weeks or even the recent months, RT had started to grow back up by 1, and that should already be a case of concern, because take note, epidemics operate on exponential growth. So even a small value above 1 can actually lead to large case numbers. But take note, while RT is a good measure, is a good indicator of local transmission potential, and had been very useful all around the world. Take note that it is not, you cannot account for, or just basing on the estimates that we produce, it is hard to actually attribute the effect due only to the specific NPIs, because the model, the estimation framework, is not really designed to single out the effect of NPIs, but rather it is reflective of many of the other factors that affect your case counts, which obviously NPI is one of them. So I think there is a current model being developed by Imperial College to isolate the effect of NPI itself. But nevertheless, if you just look at the series of RTs and just keeping this in mind, even sharp decreases or sharp increases in your series can also be reflective of your NPIs per se. So what does it mean? So as is highlighted by the previous talks by our great speakers earlier this morning, in using these models, in using these numbers, we do not really just rely on the exact numbers that which are shown, but rather we should be more focused on the qualitative picture of what they are saying, that if you introduce this, has transmission gone down, so on and so forth, but not exactly by how much, but rather we would just want to see if there is indeed an effect, at least indicative of an effect. And likewise, given all the limitations of 𝗓𝗡 now, despite the improvements that it already have over 𝗓𝗡-STIM, we are currently exploring a more advanced tool. We are currently developing a more advanced tool that is able to isolate out effects of importation to local transmission, as well as local to local transmission potential. And to be able to do this, we would want to also put in mobility data into the model. So basically expanding the estimation framework to include mobility data, because as we all know, with all the NPIs that we have introduced so far, they are best reflected in mobility data. And this can be shown if you've initially explored Google mobility data or Apple mobility data, which have been made available by these big companies since COVID epidemic has happened. So in other words, there is a technical document which is working on this, and we have already tried doing this with Malaysia, given how in the previous weeks they are seeing decline in cases. So instead, we are now trying to adjust for RT. Basically, what it does is that we're trying to adjust RT to be able to reflect to be able to use them and produce robust estimates even in the context of small case counts, and likewise be able to separate out local to local and imported to local transmission, so that quarantine effects specific to border closure and quarantine effects specific to contact tracing can also be isolated out. And hopefully after this, we'll also try to do this in some LGUs in the Philippines, which does not really have large cases data, but is at risk of getting COVID-19 just because of some other risk indicators, as mentioned in earlier talks. So I think that ends my talk. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Robert. Please stay on for short Q&A. So we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions before we end the session. Okay, maybe just to select. No, most of the questions have been answered in the chat box already, but maybe to our speakers for today, this question might be a good way to end the session. Looking at all the information presented, what best recommendation can you suggest to the government to decrease the transmission of the epidemic? Any of our speakers can turn on their video and maybe respond to this question. What are your recommendations to our government to decrease the transmission of the epidemic? Some insights from our speakers.
Irina, I'll try to explain.
Yes.
I think what needs to be done has been clear from the start. No, we know it from theory, from experience with previous outbreaks, with experience in the current outbreak for other countries. No, and it's the basic things. No, non-pharmaceutical interventions, testing, tracing, isolation, and quarantine. No, I think what we need to do better is execution. No? Getting the right people in the to do the right thing. No? So, for example, recently we just found out that less than 1% of LGUs have contact tracing teams. No? So we know contact tracing is important, but we're not doing it very well. So it's things like that that we need to do better. No? It's less of what we need to do, but more of how to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. That's a very nice insight, no? So we will try to help our LGUs now implement, no, all these plans. Okay. Any other insights from our participants before we close the session?
Linda, may I ask a question of Robert?
Sure, Dr. Wong. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, Robert. I was just wondering, why is it that the RT is not reflective of the increasing cases in June and July? You know, so we had a rapid increase in cases, but the RT seemed to be still flat, not very close to. It's above 1, but it's still very close to 1. No? We would have expected that it would have gone up to 2 or 3, as in what happened in Wuhan.
Well, actually, that is not the case, sir. I think it did reflect the increase in the testing, which I'm not really sure if it's the increase in testing. I think you're saying the increase in cases. Yes. So it did still reflect the increase in cases, because if you would see, if I can share my screen again, I think I can. Nasaan na yun? If you would see here, it has increased. It has sharply increased from level of 1 to above, say, I would say 1.1 or 1.2, so on and so forth. But take note that even that much increase, while I think people would be expecting it to jump to as high as 2 or 3, but that will not be the case, because it has we are also trying to account for the other sources of variation, which kind of flattens it out, or basically because of the way that cases are reported in such a way that they are spread out over a period of time. That is the reason why the RT, while it has increased from, say, around value of 1 to 1.2, 1.15, it has leveled out at that level just because of that effect. But take note that as I have said, even just a slight increase in RT, say even just a 5% or 10% increase in RT above 1, it can already lead to, say, or it can already be reflective of around 40 to 80% increase in your total number of cases, because of the exponential nature of the growth of your epidemic. And obviously, by that nature, if you will be increasing RT to levels of 2 to 3, or at least if that is how you would be estimating it, then that would mean that you have a very much blowing up epidemic. So yes, so I think it did. So bottom line is, I think it still did reflect that. It's just that because of all the smoothing that has been done to account for all the possible biases that the data might have, and all the assumptions that we have, it is not as sharp as what we would have expected.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think, Andre, that ends our second session for today.
Okay. Thank you, Doc Rina, and thank you to all the speakers of the second session, and again, the first session. No, before we officially end this, and before I call on Ma'am Merlita Opeña to close the first day of this webinar, there are several important announcements. Again, please do not forget to submit the evaluation forms that will be shared to you as a link for today's participation. And for those who are curious, it's official. No, by the end of the third day, we will be sharing all presentations, as well as a transcript of questions and answers from the text chat dialogue that we have. That will be at the end of the third day. And please don't leave yet after the closing talk, because we'll have some sort of a class picture. No, yes, we will request you to turn on your cameras later and smile, and as if we're all together. But before that, to close the session for today officially, I now call on Ms. Merlita Opeña Chief Research Information Communications Digitalization Division, PCHRD, DOST, for her remarks. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning. Thank you, Andre. Our partners from the Ateneo de Manila University, from the UP Manila Telehealth Center, Rina and the FASTER research team, which has now, I think, grown. You're working now with other researchers across institutions in the country and even with international collaborators, and that's a good indicator. And we're also seeing very young researchers joining your team. To our resource speakers and participants from the academic and research community, I understand this is a technical session, so more of our audience is from the research community. Congratulations, Rina and your team, for organizing this 3-day seminar, The Science Behind FASTER for COVID-19. Today's discussions show that for health, the problems in the health system is not limited to the actors in the health system. So we see the researchers from mathematics, statistics, information, computing, and data sciences working with our health professionals. And that's the way we really advocate that the solutions for our health concerns will really come from across the sectors of society. And I'm glad that you're working closely with all the stakeholders and people who can help provide the solutions. I think during this time of pandemic, even the president says that the important inputs really come from the science community, so that the work of Rina and her team cannot really be overemphasized, the importance of what you're doing. And I think as Rina would bear this out, the project FASTER in the initial stages really was aiming to help the healthcare system. And the road to the adoption of the results is not really easy. It takes time and it takes a lot of user engagements. And I think the speed also in which the research team has responded to the pressing concerns of COVID-19 pandemic has generated important value of the research as they input to the decision and policy making of our, not only the local DOH, but nationally as a country, the importance of your output and the importance also of accurate data as we see in the discussions. I'd like to just say that the research is not finished at the end of the completion date. It continues to be enriched by the researchers so that the value would have more impact, not only to the policymakers, but also to peoples and communities which will provide the data. So we need to engage them, to teach them, and to let them appreciate that good data is good decision making and will also redound to good programs and good services of government. So keep up with what you're doing. The DOST-PCHRD is here to support you. Our mantra is we support you from the research idea generation to research translation. For what benefit would be the research outputs if society, the important concerns of society are not addressed. So right now you're doing what we need. So keep up the good work. And I hope the many young researchers joining the platform RINA will be generating more and more researches that will be of value to us as a country. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ma'am. Andre? Ma'am Rose, picture taking po.
Picture taking.
And Andre, are we?
Hi everyone. Yeah. Yeah. Na-disconnect lang ako. Thank you, everyone. Announcements again, alam ko paulit-ulit, but they're important. Evaluation forms, please, for your participation today. And don't worry about the PowerPoint presentations and Q&A text because they will be provided for you, to you, at the end of the 3rd day. And tapos na tayo, but it's not yet done without the class picture. May I request everyone to turn on their cameras, their videos. And once you have them open, I now give the mic to 𝗏𝗏, who will instruct us, when to smile and what to do. Maraming salamat, 𝗏𝗏.
Okay, smile lang po tayo. Medyo matagal lang po ito kasi marami pong pages. The picture, please avoid typing in chat para hindi lumabas yung chat image dun sa capture. Sige, sige, 5 seconds and then I'll start capturing. Okay, 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, next one. Smile. Next one. Smile. 3 more. Smile. One last. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat. This has been Andre Coronel, just the MC. Thank you for every important person here right now. And with that, see you tomorrow for day 2. Ma'am Rina, final word.
Thank you. Okay, bye. See you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank
See you
you.
tomorrow.
Maraming salamat sa participation.
Maraming salamat. Doc
Thank
LV,
you.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
All speakers, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.